Baruch Hashem. Okay. Are we ready? Are we ready? Are we steady? Okay, so we are the classes on this week's portion, Parshas Devarim. We started a new book, the book of Devarim, which is called Mishnah Torah, which means the repetition or the what the Moshe Rabbeinu repeats. As you see in the beginning of the portion, Moshe Rabbeinu repeats the journey of the Jewish nation for the past 40 years. It's actually a rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu is rebuking the Jewish people in the as he gives his last will and testimony for 30 days, around 36 days, from Rosh Chodesh Shvat, from the beginning of Shvat, till the Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, when he passes away. So we started a new track. We always start Devarim before Tisha B'Av. This year it's going to be reading Devarim the Shabbos, which is the day before Tisha B'Av. And one of the reasons is because it actually mentions in this week's Parsha Eicha, the word Eicha. Like we do on Saturday night, we say Eicha Yashva Badad, the prophecy of Jeremiah. And the essence of Moshe Rabbeinu is also giving his last testimony, what the Jewish people are going to go through, not only what they went through the last 40 years in the desert, but what they are ultimately going to go through throughout history until the coming of Mashiach. Okay. There's a beautiful sikha of the Rebbe on the Parsha, which the Rebbe really comes out to the concept of what's called, the class was called love, about love, right? I think that's what we advertise. So always the advertisement of the class. Doing what is best, not what is easiest. Really is we give something to somebody what is best, not as what is easiest. We love our children. We give them what they need, not per se what they want. Because that's what my mother would always say. You get what you need, not always what you want. Yeah. So, and what is true love? What is the true aspect of getting something, giving something on a silver spoon, or one working for what he receives? So there's the concept of the Gemara says, for example, the Gemara calls it bread of shame, where a person would get something for nothing, or another expression of the Talmud. A person wants his own work, one cubit of his own work, then 10 cubits of somebody else's. 9 cubits of somebody else's. I don't know if it works today, but that's the way in general the Eivishter made a person. God made a person like Sheish Yisrael and Tavi. The person should go out and not receive things out of some kind of gift, but to work for his successes and enjoy his successes and feel good, so to say, from his successes. And that's why also is another expression in Gemara, "Seinam matanas yichya," right? The expression: a person hates gifts will live longer. A person should not want to live off of gifts. He should be a giver. Better to be a giver than a taker. I mean, we should always be in the even though Moshe Rabbeinu says it'll always be, as we're reading in the Torah, Moses says it'll always be poor people and people that need to take. But God should bless you that you should be the one who's giving, and not the one who needs to take. And we should always be in that kind of attitude. So this is a beautiful sikha based on the page. We're starting on page 37, based on a very interesting discussion, the Gemara between Rabbi Akiva. We're going to see a beautiful Gemara. We're going to discussion between Rabbi Akiva and a baisus, what do they call it? The baisusim, or the Sabbachites. Sabbachites, those who believed in the oral, in the written law, not in the oral law. Sadducees. Sadducees. Thank you very much. So there was a very interesting discussion between Rabbi Akiva and a Sadducee. You should know, just realize that the Gemara, there was a lot of arguments between the sages and the Sadducees. Because they were great sages also. They were not just simple people. And that's why they argue with the sages, and the sages argue with them. And they had, their great, so to say, great philosophy, which the Chachamim showed them over and over that it was basically a phallus to the philosophy, and ultimately they disappeared. The Sadducees disappeared, and the Chachamim, the Torah continues until today. So we're going to start on page 37 in this pasuk in Deuteronomy. The beginning of the Torah. Eila Devarim, these are the words. Again, these are the words, are very long words, because now we're going to go from the beginning of Devarim till the end of the year. And these, as I said, to when Moshe Rabbeinu dies. And this is a 36-day drasha. I don't know if Moshe Rabbeinu spoke for 36 days straight, but it's a 36-day situation from the beginning of the parasha till the end of the Torah reading, the end of the portion of Deuteronomy. And really that's why it's called in many places Moshe Rabbeinu's speech, Moshe Rabbeinu's drashas. Really the Torah ends really last week with the completion of Numbers, Bamidbar, and now we go Eila Devarim Asher Diba Moshe. These are the words that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke. I'll call Yisrael to the entire Jewish nation, Be'eva Yarden, in the other side of the Jordan, Ba'midbar, in the desert, Ba'arava, in the Arava, Mul Saif, which is at the edge of the river, the Sea of Reeds, Bein Paran, Bein Tofel, between the land, between Paran and Tofel, V'lavain, the Chatzeres, and the Lavain, and Chatzeres, with Dizahav and Dizahav. Okay.
No.
So right. So Rashi right away says, before we continue, Rashi right away says, you look in text number 1b on that verse, that what are these places? What are these places? One place, what's going to like these all these places? So Rashi says that Moshe Rabbeinu had mercy on the Jews. He didn't want to go tell them again all the places that they angered God. So he gives it to them in encrypted. He tells them Bamidbar. So Rashi says, since these are words of rebuke, text number 1b, and Moshe enumerates here all the places where they angered God. Therefore, he makes it not explicit mention of the indication which they transgress, but rather merely alludes to them. And it mentions the name of place out of respect of Israel. So in the desert, Rashi says, this is when they went into the desert, and the Jewish people said, oh, you took us into the desert to die. In the plains, this is the story of Baal Peor. In the plains of Moab, what happened right after the story of Bilam. Opposite the Sea of Reeds, he's going back and forth. After the Reed Sea, this is when the Jewish people were at the sea, and they said, oh, again, God took us out of Egypt to die in the desert. Between Paran and Tofel, again, these are the story. Paran is a story that happened. Vidi Lavan is where they argued with the man. It was called Lavan. It was white. They were not happy with the man. In the desert of Paran is the spies. Chatzeres is Kairach. That happened. The story of Kairach, Chatzeres, and Dizahav. Dizahav means too much gold. Too much gold is the story of the golden calf. So Moshe Rabbeinu in one verse, he tells them all the stories. A lot of the stories, not all. A lot of things happen. He tells them. He knocks off all he tells them all what happened in an encrypted way, not to embarrass them, so to say. He gives them the highlights of the negativity that they did. Yeah?
Yeah.
Although part of it can be put down to the fact they had all this gold, there was no place to spend it.
Okay, this is this is not the class. Let's continue. Achad asa yom chayrev. There were 11 days. Really, this is the class is based on the second verse. Achad asa yom chayrev. It was 11 days journey from Chayrev. Chayrev is Mount Sinai. It's one of the names of Mount Sinai. 11 days from Chayrev by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. 11 days. It is something that should take 11 days. And that's what it means. Something that should take 11 days from Chayrev to Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is a place before the Jewish people went into Israel. And ultimately, it came to pass 40 years and 11th month. So we're holding something that should have taken 11 days. Took what? Took actually 3 days. That's what it actually means. Something should have taken 11 days. Actually, they went from Chayrev, from Mount Sinai, to Kadesh Barnea in 3 days. It should have really taken 11 days. But it took only 3 days. That shows you how much God wanted to take them into the land of Israel. And ultimately, what the God took from 11 days, compressed into 3 days, took 40 years. Is that how he's rebuking them? Something that should have taken 11 days. Took him 3 days. So they should have been the next day in the land. Should have really taken them 4 days to get into the land of Israel from Mount Sinai till, it means usually it would take 11 days. I don't know how you figured out. It would take 11 days. Take millions of people to travel from Mount Sinai to Israel. It would take 11 days. Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is not Israel yet. It's still in the Transjordan. It took only 3 days. And still, we're here 40 years later. We're back in Kadesh Barnea 40 years later. Wow. Because when Kadesh Barnea happened, the story of the spies, and then they went back forth. They traveled. They set it back for another 38 years.
Well, I hope Hashem shortens the days.
Amen. So Amar Lahem Moshe, text number 2, on page. This is Rashi, page 39. Amar Lahem Moshe. Moshe Ben says, "See what cause you cause. There's no shorter route from Chayrev to Kadesh Barnea than through Mount Seir, and even that journey is of 11 days. That's how much it takes the journey from Mount Chayrev, from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. But you miraculously traveled it for 3 days. The Eibishter wanted. That is the extent which the Shechina, God, exerted herself. It says in feminine because the Shechina is feminine. You see God is herself. To hasten your arrival to the land of Canaan. The Eibishter wanted to bring you in the land of Canaan. He wanted to bring you to the land of Israel in 3 days, 4 days. Because it should have taken, that's called in the Gemara, kfitza derech, the shortening of the ways. The Eibishter God takes something that can travel many days, and He can shorten the journey. That's a miracle. That's a miraculous kind of a situation. So God did a miraculous situation, took 11-day journey, turned it into 3-day journey, and now we're holding 40 years later. So look what happens. Yeah. Look what happens. But because you sinned, God made you travel around Mount Seir for 40 years. That's it. Because the Aveda, something that was so quick, turned into something that is so long. How so close but so far? Yeah. So close but so far. There. Almost there, but we always sometimes we blow it. Yeah. Okay, that's the simple Chumash and Rashi. So it's interesting that Moshe Rabbeinu expressed this sikha, this talk of the Rebbe is on Moshe Rabbeinu expressed that God has a love for the Jewish nation. He wanted to bring them in the 3 days, something that usually should take 11 days. He wanted to bring them into there in 3 days, and still, seemingly, the Jewish people knew how to circumvent that. So we come to a Gemara, beautiful story in the Gemara. Text number 3 is a Gemara in the tractate of Menachos. By Susim Amrim, so there's a famous argument. One of the famous arguments of the Sadducees and the sages was about Sfirat Omer, the counting of the Omer. And the sages, the Sadducees hold, the verse in the Torah says, you shall start counting after Shabbos. I've mentioned this many times, we've learned this many times, but hopefully. After Shabbos, it says. The Torah says, Memachas HaShabbos. After Shabbos. The sages said it meant after the first day of Pesach. So that's why we start counting after the first day of Pesach. The second day of Pesach, we start counting the Omer. On the second night of Pesach, we start counting the Omer. That's what the sages learned to pasuk. The Sadducees said, no, you're going to follow the Torah Shebasar. You got to follow the written law. In the Torah, it says after Shabbos, you always start counting the Omer on Sunday. Doesn't make a difference. If Pesach falls out on Tuesday, you wait till Sunday. If Pesach falls out on Monday, on Sunday, you have to wait till the following Sunday. It's always on Shabbos. The rabbis argued, said you cannot say that. The simple argument was, because the Torah says 50 days after Pesach is the holiday of Shavuot. If you're not going to do it after the first day of Pesach, then Shavuos might come out 57 days after Pesach. Right? If the Pesach falls out on Sunday, and you're not going to start counting the next Sunday, then Shavuos is not going to be the 50th day after Pesach. It's going to be the 57th day after Pesach. So you cannot say that the Torah means after the Shabbos means after Sunday, always on Sunday, because it doesn't make sense. Then the Torah wouldn't make sense. Then the other psukim the other verses don't make sense. So to make all the verses make sense, the rabbi said Yontiv is called in the Torah Shabbos too. You find many times, like Yom Kippur is called Shabbos Shabbosin, it's Shabbos of Shabbos. You find that the Torah calls Yontiv Shabbos too, and therefore when it says Machas HaShabbos, when it says you shall count the aim of the day after Shabbos, it means the day after the first day of Pesach. And then Shavuos will always be 50 days later, and that's what we count, 49 days, and the 50th day is Shavuos. Right? This is the famous argument, where you look at the verse, just take the verse, God says to Memachas HaShabbos, don't interpret the verse anything, just take it, doesn't make sense, tough luck. No, that's what the Sadducees said. So, for example, on Shabbos, it says you shouldn't have a fire on Shabbos. So the Sadducees said you're not allowed any fire. You gotta live in the dark. No hot food. Everything has to be cold because you can't have any fire burning in your house on Shabbos. Right? So you can't have any fire on Shabbos. So the Sadducees held that on Shabbos you cannot. In those days you couldn't have any heat. You couldn't have any lights, any candles. And any food could be cold. Nothing. You imagine 24 hours. If it was not, it was a minus zero. Tough luck. The Torah says you're not allowed to have any fire on Shabbos. So the Chachamim said you're not allowed to start a fire on Shabbos. But if you start the fire before Shabbos, or if you cook the food before Shabbos and you leave it on the cholent on the food cooking on Shabbos, that's why you should know that you should eat cholent. The Alter Rebbe writes you should eat cholent on Shabbos. Why? Because that shows the Munas Chachamim. By eating cholent, hot food, which is called chamim. It's not called in the Gemara cholent. That was a later name. In the Gemara, it's called chamim. Chamim means hot food. That's cholent. It's a hot food. It's on the fire a whole Shabbos. So we eat chamim. We eat specifically cholent or anything hot on Shabbos. Cholent is the easiest thing to keep cooking the whole 24 hours or whatever, how many hours. So we eat cholent to show emunas chachamim that we believe in the chachamim. Chachamim wanted that the Jew should have hot food on Shabbos. Shouldn't be like the Sadducees said you can't have hot food on Shabbos. You should have hot food on Shabbos. And that's why we eat hot food on Shabbos. That's one you should eat hot food on Shabbos. Maybe tea or coffee could be considered a hot food on Shabbos too.
Plata.
What?
A plata. You put everything on the plata. It warms it up.
Right. But this is really cooked food. Plata is warmed up. It's already cooked food. A chont is a cooked food. It's cooking a whole time. So it really is the concept of showing the opposite of Sadducees, which said that you're not allowed to cook on, you're not allowed to have food that started before Shabbos and being continuously cooked on Shabbos. So they took the verse, and it's simple, that you're not allowed to have any fire on Shabbos. It's Aviru Eish B'chol Mashrisechem Yom HaShabbos. You're not allowed to have fire in your house on Shabbos. End of story. The Chachamim learned that in a different way, self-understood. Right? So, we're going to go to the Sfira, so go back to the Sfira. There are many arguments, and you find these arguments to I mean, that the sages didn't take these arguments and ignore them. They argued with these people, and they showed them how they were wrong. How they were, according to the way you learn the Torah, it's impossible to learn the way they're learning the Torah. Right? Like ayin, tachas ayin, shame, you have a lot of things in Torah that if you don't have Torah Shebal Peh, if you don't have the written law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you don't do that in law, right? We don't do that. It's not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a hand, and a foot for a foot. So why did the Torah say it? If it's not that way, that's a whole different subject. But that's Torah Shebal Peh. That's you cannot just take the Torah and read it and say that's the law, because that's not true. You have to learn the Gemara to know really the law. Right? And that's the way the Chacham learned the Torah. So the rest of the world always uses that verse, an eye for an eye, a foot for a foot, and a tooth for a tooth. And meanwhile, they're using the Torah while we don't interpret it that way. We don't interpret an eye for an eye, a foot for a foot, a hand for a hand. If somebody cuts off somebody else's hand, God forbid, you don't cut off his hand. There's no such kind of thing. There's no such kind of law. And even though the verse says that way, even though the verse openly says it that way. So you have to learn Torah Shebal Peh. You need to learn the Gemara to know what the Torah means. Because without it, the Torah has no, per se, almost has no meaning. And even more than that, the Torah, it's not exactly the way the Torah is written. And again, the Chachamim prove that's not what it means. Okay. So by Susim Maimim, text number 3. The Talmud, the Gemara. The Baisusim would say, Atzeres Achar HaShabbos. The Baisusim said that the festival of Shavuos always occurs on Sunday. So they also said that, they also not only argued on Shavuos, they also said that Atzeres, the holiday of Shavuos, also will always fall on a Sunday. And Nitfalahem Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, V'amalahem, Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai joined the discussion with them and said to them, fools, where did you get this from? Where did you write this from? So nobody knew, because Atzeres doesn't say in the Torah. I said the Sfira. But Atzeres doesn't say in the Torah exactly when it is. It says the 50th day. They said it's on a Sunday. It's always on a Sunday. So where do you know this? Nobody answered him except one elderly man was prattling with Adam, and he said, I have no idea. The Fatif Kinegda, he was talking. He was the word is mefaftate. He was rambling. Right, that would be the right word. Vama, and he said, this is going to see a long weekend. This is the first long weekend. You know, they always have in America, you have to have a long weekend. Everything has to be a long weekend. It doesn't make a difference when it falls out. We have to have it on Sunday.
Yeah.
So it's a long weekend, right? So this is where it comes from. See, everything comes from the Gemara. So the Gemara says that Baisusim said that Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jews. He wanted to give them a long weekend. See, every other holiday, Sukkot and Pesach are a long holiday, 7-day holidays. Now you come to Shavuos in Eretz Yisrael, it's only 1 day. It's a very short holiday. 1 day holiday. We're the Jews. How can you get into a 1 day holiday? So Moshe Rabbeinu had it. The Gemara says that this Baisusi said to Moshe Rabbeinu, he said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jewish people. And therefore, he said, you know what? I'm going to give you a 2-day holiday. A long weekend. Shavuos should always be on Sunday. And now you have a long weekend. So, so he established, Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm going to give you a long weekend, and therefore, Shavuos will always be on Sunday.
But that's not how it ended up.
No, we don't agree with them. Shavuos goes the 50th day, whether it's on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yochanan ben Zakkai said this?
No, the Sadducees said it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Sorry, go.
So then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answered him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answered him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him this verse we just said. Achad asa yom echayre derech har seir. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to the Sadducee, come on, let's learn a verse. The verse says, in this week's portion, that it should take 11 days to go from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, Derech Har Seir. It should take 11 days, right? Even normally, Moshe Rabbeinu says, it should take 11 days. So Moshe Rabbeinu, if you're saying Moshe Rabbeinu loves the Jews so much, something that he himself says it should take 11 days, and how long did it take him? 40 years. What is he can't find his way? This is the lover of the Jewish people. You're saying that Moshe Rabbeinu loves the Jewish people, that he gave him an extra day holiday, when it's something that he himself says it should take 11 days and it takes him 40 years? Wow, really loves the Jewish people a lot. He gave him an extra day of Shavuos while he dragged him to the desert for 40 years. So that's what we had. If Moshe Rabbeinu was such a lover of Jews, he would drag them to the desert for 40 years. What's going on over here? You're saying Moshe Rabbeinu loves the Jews? It seems like he doesn't love them so much. That's the Gemara. That's how the Gemara ends the story. So, what is he saying? What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound good for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Okay. Why is he knocking Moshe Rabbeinu? What does he want from Moshe Rabbeinu? What does he really want from Moshe Rabbeinu? That's the answer to the Sadducee? He says, oh, you're saying Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jews? I'm going to show you Moshe Rabbeinu didn't love the Jews. That's his answer? What is it? What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Like, whose team is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai on? Is he on Moshe Rabbeinu's team? Is he on the Vaisusin? What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saying? What is the story? What is the meaning of the story? What is his answer? What?
We're going to find out now.
What's the answer to this? What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Why would he say such a thing? What is his answer? What was the real question over here? He said Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jews, and seemingly Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I don't know if Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jews so much. He dragged them through the desert for 40 years. If he loved them so much, he would have had them in the land of Israel in 3 days, at least 11 days. God made it 3 days, but at least 11 days, not 40 years. 11 to 40 years is a pretty big difference.
They weren't ready.
So that's where seemingly the opposite happens. Look at the Rebbe in text number 4. The Rebbe says the biggest question here is the core of their debate. Seemingly, you look at the Gemara. What's the core of the debate? The Baisusi is saying Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Jews, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't love the Jews. That sounds like an interesting debate between a great sage, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and a baisusi, a person that hates that's going against the Torah, he's saying that he loves the Jews, and he's saying that he doesn't love the Jews. What's the meaning of this Gemara? So that's the debate. The biggest question here is the core of the debate. How can it be that a baitusi is the one who says Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, is the lover of the Jews, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says no. And if Moshe Rabbeinu was a teacher, was a lover of the Jews, he would have been keeping the desert for 40 years. As if to question that premise, that Moshe Rabbeinu is not a lover of Jews. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai believes that Moshe Rabbeinu is not a lover of the Jewish nation.
It wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu's decision.
But that's what he answers him. I understand. That's a separate question. So, but that's what he answers him. He's blaming it on Moshe Rabbeinu. Yochanan ben Zakkai is blaming it on Moshe Rabbeinu. He's saying, you know what? If he was a great leader of the Jews, figure out a way how to get him in earlier. Seems like he was happy that they were staying in the desert for 40 years. So, how does he love the Jews so much? He gave him an extra day of the holiday. Meanwhile, we're keeping him in the desert for 40 years.
Some trade-off.
Some trade-off. So what's the meaning of the Gemara? It's beautiful, and what's the meaning of, then we have to understand, because Moshe Rabbeinu brings us down. That's what the whole debate started, because Moshe Rabbeinu brings us down in this week's Parsha. 11 days. It should have taken regularly 11 days. That means if it would come through me, it would have been 11 days. The Eibishter, God, sin and went through God, it was 3 days. But through me, as a great leader, my GPS is 11 days. God's GPS is 3 days, mine is 11 days. But still, we're holding 40 years later.
Tough love.
So the Rebbe tries to understand what was the difference between the Baisusim and the Chachamim. If you understand the difference between the Sadducees and the Chachamim and the sages, we'll be able to understand what their debate was. What was the basic difference? And I already mentioned the basic difference between the Sadducees and the rabbis was what's Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, the written law and the oral law. So the written law we know is the 5 books of Moses, or the Tanakh, the 24 books of the Torah, is ultimately the Tanakh, the prophets, etc. But that's Torah Shebiksav. The Baisusim took Torah Shebiksav, the 5 books of Moses, and they did not accept the interpretations of the Chachamim. The Chachamim interpretations, according to the Chachamim, were not something that they interpreted later on. It was something that they received, they received from Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu, in essence, gave Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebiksav. That he gave both. He didn't just give the written law, he gave the oral law. That was really the crux of the argument. That's still today. You can find this kind of philosophy coming into people's minds, right? Oh, the sages. The Torah says, hey, but we're the sages. Who are the sages? Who are the sages? So the sages said, I don't agree with the sages. Sages are human beings, and that's true. So I don't have to agree with everything the sages say. Well, that's not. If that's true, then we can close the whole book, right? Then we can close everything. The sages are just have written down something that was given before. When Moshe Rabbeinu said, "You shall," when the Torah says, just like in the verse in the Torah says, "You shall bind it on your hands, and there shall be as a sign between your eyes." If there's no Torah Shebal Peh, if there's no oral law, what that means? So not only you would not know how to put on tefillin today, you would not know how to put on tefillin when Moshe Rabbeinu said that verse, because the verse has no meaning. I mean, it has a meaning. I don't know. I can give you 500 interpretations to that verse. There should be as a sign in your hand. I don't know. Take a tattoo your hand. I don't know. I can come up with 100 different ways that you should have a sign upon your hand. I don't know. There should be a sign. What should be a sign upon your hand? I don't know. Let's all argue and come up with something that can be a sign upon your hand. And it should be between your eyes. Let's all argue what that means too. Right? Because it doesn't say in the Torah. It does take the verse in the Torah. I don't know what it means. Really don't know what it means. So when Moshe Rabbeinu came down the mountain, whichever day it was, and he said, this is what the Eibush said, it should be a sign upon your hands, and as a and between your eyes, it must have told the Yidden what it means. That you need to take a black box. I mean, how do you go from the sign on your hand to a pair of tefillin? That's like a real big jump. It's a big stretch, right? Tefillin, 4 portions. This is like a jump. Like, how'd you get that in the verse? How do you see that in the verse? And so too, 90% of the Torah would be that way. Yeah. There would be no Yontif, there would be no Shabbos, there would be nothing. There would be no kashrus. Besides, don't eat a pig. Okay, so we got that. That we don't have to look too much. But you know what I mean? Majority of Torah, without Torah Shabbat Peh, you have no meaning. So therefore, the question would be, why did Moshe write it down? If Moshe Rabbeinu already explained it, why didn't he write it down? So that was Torah Shabbat Peh. That's what it's called the oral law, because it was orally given. Why? Because in essence, the Torah wanted that it should be there should be a concept of learning. That's Torah Shabbat Peh. That there should be an aspect of written Torah, which is the aspect of something that is so to say concrete. It's engraved, and something that is learned. Torah wanted every Jew to learn. If everything would be written, why do we need to learn? So here the Torah gave us the capability to all learn. To all learn. To want to go to yeshiva and learn from the previous generation. Right? Ultimately, the rabbis realized that they need to write it down, because they're gonna go into gullus, they're gonna go into exile, and if we're not gonna write it down, it's gonna again be forgotten. So therefore, they went against tradition. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, decided that you have to write Torah Shabbat Peh down. That's how he wrote the Mishnah, the Mishnayot, the tractates of Mishnah, which ultimately from that came the Gemara and the Talmud, which is right behind you, and ultimately the Shulchan Aruch, go to Jewish law, and it continues until today. What continues until today? Torah Shabbat Peh. The beauty of Torah Shabbat Peh is all about the word or the mouth, and every person is supposed to learn Torah Shabbat Peh, and we're all supposed to expound the Torah Shabbat Peh. Everybody in this room and everybody's listening needs to become a sage. Doesn't make a difference whether you're a man, a woman. Doesn't make a difference. Everybody needs to learn Torah Shabbat Peh. Needs to not only learn Torah, but also to expound Torah Shabbat Peh. To lahagdil Torah, to make Torah Shabbat Peh more bigger. You can't make Torah Shabbat Ksav bigger. Right? Torah Shabbat Ksav, the 5 books of Moses, and that's what it is. The verse is the verse. You can't change the verse, you can't take out the verse, you can't add a verse. But on Torah Shabbat Peh, there's bigger libraries than this. Right? There's bigger libraries. So where's your book?
I mean, it can be expanded.
Where's your book? Everybody should have a book here in the library. If you send me your book, I'll put it in the library. Okay. So we'll have your book. Moshe Einbinder's book, and we'll have his book on the expanding of Torah, your thesis. Yes.
Isn't there a place in the Torah where it says Torah in plural? Isn't that?
Yeah, sure.
Proves that there's
100%. Because that's the plural. That's the written. The written law is you're saying that the Torah, your Torah. You have that expression. Give me a part in your Torah. Seira is plural, because in the aspect of Torah Shabbat Peh, it is plural. We need to expound upon it and make it bigger and better. As we say every day at the end of our, when we daven, we say, God wanted to give merit to the Jewish people. He gave them the Torah that you can be marba, that you can expand upon. Okay? And that's why you also say a very famous statement in your davening. You say, Yiratzim Vanecha, may be the will of God, that you should give me, Bana Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash should be rebuilt, V'mheira b'yameinu, in our days, V'sein chalkeinu b'seir secha, and grant us a portion in your Torah. What means grant us a portion? That each and every one of us should have a chidush in the Torah. Each and every one of us should have expound in the Torah. something that you will come about and learn and inspire somebody else or yourself in the teachings of the Torah.
Is that why the Rebbe had that campaign for everybody to buy a letter?
No, that's a separate issue. That's buying a physical letter. This is learning Torah, expounding the knowledge of Torah. Expounding the knowledge of Torah has nothing to do with anything physical. It's a spiritual thing. It's in your mind. You need to expound. If you want to take your teachings and put it on a paper and bring a book, then you take it and bring it into a book. So that would be beautiful because then somebody else can read it. Imagine if none of these rabbis sat and wrote their teachings. The Rambam didn't sit there and write out his teaching. The Rashi didn't give his teaching. He didn't write down his teachings. If Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wouldn't have written the Mishnah, if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would not have written the Mishnah, you wouldn't have a Gemara, you wouldn't have Shulchan Aruch, you would have nothing. So here, the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went and he wrote the Mishnah. And in those days, it was not an easy thing to write the Mishnah. It was not an easy thing. Today, everything is easy. It's a typer, it's in a computer. In those days, before even before 100 years, it was not an easy thing to sit and write, and that's something. Today, you can do that. It's easy, and you should. You're 100% should do that. And the Gemara, every one of us, not only I'll just look at you because you've done it already. So therefore, the Gemara wants to show this. The Gemara there's a beautiful Gemara where the Gemara wants to impress upon us with a story, and that's where we see the beauty of Torah through a story. And we can read the story quickly in text number 5 on page 42 in your book. It's a Gemara in Tractate of Bava Metzia, and the Gemara tells a story, an argument between. It's a famous story. I'm sure you heard this famous story. That's where we can go quickly. Rabbi Lezer and the rabbis had an argument. Rabbi Lezer was one of the greatest sages, extremely, extremely powerful mind. And he argued in the Gemara a lot with Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua was a Nasi then at that time. Rabbi Lezer wasn't Nasi, and ultimately you'll see this argument over here. And the rabbis agreed with Rabbi Yeshua, majority agreed with Rabbi Yeshua, and the halacha was like him, and Rabbi Lezer was unhappy with the situation. So look at it on that day when they discussed the matter. Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion. Rabbi Eliezer actually showed that the rabbis are wrong, but the rabbis did not accept his position. He then said to them, if the halacha is according to my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. He said, you see the carob tree outside the synagogue, outside the house of study? The carob tree was miraculously uprooted. The carob tree fell down or whatever. No, actually uplifted. 100 cubits. And some say 400 cubits. No, 100 cubits. 100 cubits is at least a minimum of 150 feet.
Whoa.
I mean, the carob tree, with a rocket ship. Oh, you 400 cubits. You're talking about 650 feet. Now, you can imagine you're sitting in Beis HaMedrash, you're arguing with this rabbi. This rabbi says, see that carob tree, that tree out there? If God agrees with me, this tree is going to uplift itself. Now, who's going to argue with him then? Right? Anybody can say, okay, oh, wow, carob tree moved. I mean, it must be true. One does not cite Allah. So they said, no, we don't accept you. We're still not agreeing with you. One does not cite halachic proofs from a carob tree, that a carob tree has moved. So we're going to cite halacha because a carob tree is flying in the air. It doesn't impress us. It doesn't impress us. He said to them, if the halacha is according to my opinion, the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backwards, began to flow the opposite direction. See? Would God make the carob tree fly? Would God make the stream go backwards if he didn't agree with me? So they said, no, one does not cite halachic proof on a stream. He said to them, if the halacha is in accordance to my opinion, the walls of this study hall will prove it. The walls of the study hall leaned inwards. It started to fall. Now you think that they would get frightened. The London Bridge is falling down. The walls are coming down. And the walls are still leaning forward and began to fall. Rabbi Yeshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in the matters of halacha, What is your business? What are you getting involved in our argument? The walls did not fall. In difference to Rabbi Yeshua. But they didn't go straight either, because Rabbi Lezer was there too. These are two great sages. And in difference to Rabbi Lezer, and they remain leaning. Rabbi Lezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance to my opinion, heaven will prove it. Okay, the tree didn't work, the stream didn't work, the walls falling down didn't work. You know what? God himself will come out a voice from heaven and say that the law is like me. Can argue with God?
Yeah,
That's a pretty rough one. The divine verse emerged. A voice came out from heaven and said, why are you arguing with Rabbi Lezer? As halacha is always according to him. Why are you arguing with Rabbi Lezer? It's like him. Start arguing already. Rabbi Yeshua stood up. Rabbi Yeshua was the Nasi. He was the head of the academy. Stood up on his feet and said, it's written, the Torah says himself, that it's not in heaven. Torah lei b'shamayim. The Torah is not in heaven. What does that mean? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, since the Torah was already given in Mount Sinai, we did not decide halachic opinion according to divine voice. We decide halachic opinions according to the sages that are sitting around this room. We don't decide opinions on divine voices. According to the divine voice, for God said at Sinai, you shall follow the majority of opinion. So therefore, we're not impressed. And they voted against Rabbi Yehuda, and the halacha was not like him. There were certain cases. The Gemara even brings the case down what they were arguing with, but it's not part of this class. It's a whole other sikh of the Rebbe. They argued over an oven, and it's a whole interesting separate topic. The Gemara continues. It says years later, Rabbi Nosson encountered Elijah the prophet, one of the rabbis of that academy. These great sages, they had this chus to meet Elijah the prophet. They would meet Elijah the prophet. Elijah was hanging around the city. He was always could be Elijah something over here today. You don't know who he is, but maybe you walk down the street, you can meet Elijah. He could be dressed in a regular person. You don't know who you're talking to.
Sounds good to me, because then you know what comes after that.
Yeah, that didn't come after that either. So he said to me, wow, you remember Elijah? What were you remember the whole discussion with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lezer, with the tree and all these things? He said, what did the Holy One, blessed be, at a time, what was God doing in heaven at this whole discussion? What do you think what was God doing in heaven with this whole discussion, with the rabbis, the argument, and the trees?
He's going, oi, 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 oi.
So he said, this is what he answered. Elijah the prophet, he said, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled. And he said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Not schune bane, not schune. Triumphed over me, right? Triumphed. That I agree to Rabbi Lezer, but they're right. I agree to Rabbi Lezer, but according to Torah Shebaal Peh, according to the way I wanted the Torah should be learned by humans, that the sages are right. Now that's a very interesting, just to understand that concept itself, right? So you have to understand in general, the Gemara says, when these rabbis argued, when these are Hillel and Shammai, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, they're both right. They're both right, because they're not arguing personal things, they're arguing on a Torah concept. They're arguing on the words of God, and therefore they're both correct. They're both right. Hillel was right, and Shammai was right. The only problem is you cannot do both. So therefore, how do you do it in the physical world? So meaning, that's how we continue to learn Hillel and Shammai. Even though we don't pass like by Shammai, so why do you need to learn it? Right? Why do you need to learn something that the law is not like that? Let's learn Hillel and finish. Take out Shammai, he lost. He's out. No. Divla Kim Chaim, Shammai is right too. Shammai is right, and Hillel is right. Rabbi Eliezer is right, Rabbi Yeshua is right. They're both right. But the way ultimately needs to be done in the physical world, you can't have two rights. Right? So you have Hillel and Shammai. Shammai says you write the Menorah 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Hillel says you write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? You have, how do you light the Menorah ultimately? You gotta go like Beis Hillel. You light 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Even though Shammai is right. Then you light 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But you cannot do two things. So that's why he says, if Mashiach comes, we'll light the Menorah 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Wow.
Yes.
Well,
So, because Shammai is not wrong. At this present time, we follow Beis Hillel. We follow Beis Hillel. Because of certain, first of all, practical reasons, Hillel had a majority, and the Torah says you go according to the majority. And also because, Kabbalistic reasons, because of Chesed, Beis Hillel was Chesed in the time of Galus, we need more Chesed, while Shammai was Gevura, and therefore Mashiach comes, we'll go through the concept of Gevura, even though at this present time we'll go through Chesed. Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in this argument are both right, but the point is, the question is, how do you do it in the physical world? And that's why they said Teilei b'shamayim. How to do it in the physical world, the Eibishter gave to each and every one of us. How to do it in the physical world. So that's why you'll see. You're going to go to a shul, like a Chabad house. You'll walk into the shul like 10 in the morning. Everybody's putting on tefillin here. All the men were putting on tefillin. But everybody's putting on tefillin differently. Because there's Ashkenazim and there's Sfardim and there's Chabadniks. And they're all putting on differently. They're all putting on tefillin differently. They're all putting on tefillin. But they're all doing it differently. Some of them put it this way, and some of them put it that way. And some of them put the shin over here, and some of them put the shin over there. And they're all different. Because that's the Torah Shabbal Peh. Torah Shabbat is you put on tefillin. We all put on tefillin. Torah Shabbal Peh is, how are you going to put on that tefillin? I'm going to put on this way or that way, or the other way. The Peh is we all put on tefillin. That's the most important thing, that we all put on the tefillin. So the way it ultimately translates into the world, that's where you have Torah Shabbal Peh. And that's where you have different ways of doing things. You have Shinazim and Sfardim with different ways of doing things, totally different ways of doing things. But the Torah Shabbat never changed. We all put on tefillin, we all keep kosher, and we all keep the basic laws of the Torah. So the Sadducees held that there's no Torah Shabbal Peh. Just go to the Torah Shabbat and there's no expanding upon it. What do you mean going again? What do you mean God says A or you say B? Who are you? Which in a way makes sense. That's why the Sadducees were not totally idiots. They had a point in a way, and that's why the rabbis took their issues and argued with them. Because they wanted to show that Chashon Yidden shouldn't fall into that trap. That, Torah Shabbat is everything, and Torah Shabbat is not important, and that's it. Just read the Chumash, and that's it. Even though, again, that's the Torah Shabbat doesn't take away from Torah Shabbat, God forbid. That's not forbid. There's not a concept in the Torah that the Chacham say you shouldn't do. That the Torah says you should do, and the Chacham say you shouldn't do. And if they do say, there's an explanation to it, right? Like I said, eye for an eye, a foot for a foot, which a Chacham said it meant something else. But they proved it in the Torah itself. Because you have expression in the davening every day. You say, when you daven, you say Rabbi Shmuel Omer, the way the Torah is expounded upon. you realize the 13 principles, the way the Torah is expanded. Everybody can you want to be a sage? This is the book, this is the way you should learn. The 13 principles, the way that the Torah is expanded upon. If you understand, because the psukim, if you learn the pasuk, there's so many interesting things in the pasuk. In the way that pasuk was, actually the written law was written. It's not very simple. Right? So I come to the end, I'm just going to the end. What happens if you find two verses that contradict each other? Two verses that contradict each other. Is there a capability for two verses that contradict? I showed you that before. Torah says you should you should count the Omer the day after Shabbos, and it says on the 50th day. How do you put the two verses together? That's a contradiction. Unless Pesach always falls out on Shabbos. So if Pesach falls out on Shabbos always, then you'll never have a contradiction between these two verses. Because you'll always count to Omer the day after Shabbos, and Shavuos will always come out 50 days later. But it doesn't work that way, self-understood. So then you have a contradiction in the verses. That's why you have the third verse. You need a third verse. You need to find a third verse. So in essence, the Torah put in the contradiction. That's like last week's class. The Torah wants a person. Why did the Torah write things in a very
Poetic.
not a poetic, but actually in a very questionable way, that a person should learn the Torah. A person should learn the Torah. You should find a contradiction between two verses, and figure out a third verse to bring them together. Kosev Shlishi, the third verse. It says, it's brought down, you have three things that are miskashin, are united and as one, and that is God, the Torah, and the Jewish person. So God self-understood. He wrote it. He gave the Torah, and then he gave a Jew to bring the three together. Here you have the three things. The Kosev Shlishi is the Chachamim, the Jew. The Jew that learns the Torah sees the contradiction, sees the question, and comes to the solution. That's where every one of us comes into play, right? So you don't have to have one solution for every situation. Why can't we have? That Arizal says you can have 600,000 solutions for every situation. Why do you think you have a number of solutions? Surely Jews don't like one solution. You have two opinions. You have two Jews. You have three opinions. So why not have more solutions to every situation? Why not? The more, the better. So the Eibishter wanted each one of us becomes a third partner in this three entities of God and the Torah and the Jewish nation. That each one of us, the same Chalkein, that's why we ask God, please, wow, what is chus I can have to be the third part, to the Yavah Kosev Shlishi, that I would be the third verse to bring the solutions in the learning of Torah.
The contradiction, to bring it together.
Right, to bring it together. Now, can you imagine? You're helping out God, I'm helping out God with an open contradiction. And trust me, there's a lot of contradictions. There's a lot. And the Eibishter put it there. It's like almost planted all these contradictions, all these questions, all these open-ended situations, so that we would actually have a part in the Torah. That we would be able to have a part in this beautiful journey together. It wouldn't be just everything written out for us.
We say it every morning, the Baraka with those 15 rules, right?
Yeah. Rabbi Shmuel. So look at those 13 principles, and if you understand these 13 principles, you're going to look at a pasuk in a whole different way.
Yeah.
Because every pasuk, if you understand the 13 principles, the way the Torah is the drashas, you're gonna. That's the words. The 13 principles, the way to expound the Torah. So if you understand these 13 principles, every pasuk is going to look out there, and that's the beauty of the Gemara. The Gemara takes every pasuk and it's a whole different pasuk. Why? Because the way the Torah is in the drashas, the way you're going to expound on the Torah. So you have a Gezerah Shavim, Klal or Prata Klal, etc., etc. It's unlimited. What? No, this is like it's a Mishnah.
It's in the Siddur, page
That's not Rabbi Shmuel. This is a Gemara.
25.
This is a Gemara. Okay, let's continue. So again, that's why the major difference between Torah Shebeksav, the written law, and the oral law, the major difference is, look in the Alter Rebbe in text number 6a. The Alter Rebbe says, one who enumerates the words of the written Torah fulfills the mitzvah of Torah study. If you open a Chumash and just read the words of the Torah, you did a mitzvah. Even if he does not understand them due to ignorance, he totally does not understand what he's reading. Doesn't make a difference. These are the words of the Torah. Therefore, every Shabbos, you go to shuls, you especially in Chabad houses, you go to shuls, people that don't read Hebrew, you call them up to the Torah, they make a blessing over the Torah, and the guy next to him is reading. The guy next to him has no idea, it looks Chinese.
That's right.
It does. It does.
Not. It's Hebrew. It's simple alphabet. It's Hebrew. And it's not Chinese. It's Hebrew. But he doesn't know Hebrew. He has no idea. So how are you making a blessing on something you have no idea what you're talking about? You just made a blessing before and after, and you have no idea. It sounds like Chinese. You have no idea what's being said.
You still say Amen.
Not the problem is saying Amen. The problem is saying the blessing.
He says it though.
And
the Chazan says it.
No,
You say
the
Amen
person,
to it.
yeah, not the Chazan says the blessing. The one who gets called to the Torah says the blessing. The Chazan reads it, but the one who gets called, so the Chazan is the messenger for the one who makes the blessing. But how can the one who makes the blessing something that he doesn't know what he's reading? Can I make a blessing? You eat. I'll make the blessing. You eat. No, it doesn't work the way you eat. You make the blessing. How do you make a blessing, or even a mitzvah? I make a blessing, you do the mitzvah. No, you make the blessing, the mitzvah you do. But here, in the reading of Torah, I make the blessing, and you read. That's why it used to be in tradition, there weren't those things about Korah. Every person got up and made a blessing and read the Torah. He made the blessing, he read the Torah. What happened was, as time went on, people couldn't read the Torah. So that's what they came up with about Korah. But it wasn't like that. You made a blessing, you got up to the Torah, you made a blessing, you read the Torah. The next guy got called up, he made a blessing, he read the Torah. What's somebody else reading for you? So in essence, therefore, such a person recites a blessing on the mitzvah of study of Torah when he recites the verse in the morning, and likewise upon call to the Torah. That's it. So when you say that, oh my friends, that's that only men get called to the Torah, but every man and woman says it every morning. You make a blessing over the Torah in the morning, right? Yeah. Am I right?
Yeah.
Correct. I am a Mr. Right. I'm on page 8. You actually make the same exact blessing that the guy who gets up makes it on Saturday, Monday and Thursday, but you make the same blessing. You make a blessing over the Torah. And what do you do right after that? You say a verse in the Torah. You say a couple of verses in the Torah.
Yeah.
You say, you say a verse in the Torah.
Right.
So you made a blessing, and right away you say the verse of the Torah, because that's what you're making a blessing over. You know what you have to know. You know exactly what they pick an easy verse, but if you don't say anything, most people don't know what they're saying. And then they bring a Mishnah, which is a Mishnah. So they write Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal Peh. They bring you an easy Mishnah, so everybody can understand what they're saying. So the halacha tells 6b, the above only applies to written law. That's why the first thing in the morning, when everybody makes his blessing, is only. See, every day you need to learn Torah. Why do they put the blessing in the prayer? Because every day you need to learn Torah. So every day, whether you're a man or woman, every day you need to make this blessing. The blessing over the Torah. So right away, when you make that blessing, they right away put in there a chumash, 2 verses, 3 verses of the Torah. So you've done the mitzvah. That, about on page 8 is the blessing. Right? Page 1 on page 8. And then you have the 2 verses. And then it goes into page 9. And then on page 9 you have the Mishnah also. Devarim she'ein lahem shir. These are the things that have no fixed measure. That's a Mishnah. So you have this concept. So our if Torah shebiksav, the written law, you don't have to have any. You don't have to have an understanding. The oral law, you must have an understanding. You can't make a blessing on the oral law if you have no understanding.
That's what I'm trying to learn
That's
now.
why we're sitting here.
Translation.
It's confusing, but it's there.
So the Rebbe, to look at the text number 7, page 45. So nobody's arguing that the oral law, the written law, that is the foundation of everything, and therefore you don't have to even have an understanding of what you're saying. The oral law is the word of God. The written law is the word of God, and therefore you have to know. You don't even really have an understanding. You don't have to be a sage to read the Torah, because it's not there per se that you should per se understand it or not. It's there that it should be there. Torah is given that it should be received. That's Torah shebiksav. Torah shebal peh needs to be understood. To break your head over a Gemara. That's why it's a hard thing to learn. To break your head over understanding Jewish law. To understand Jewish law. Why? Because without Torah shebal peh, you're not gonna know what to do. And Torah shebal peh is to know what to do. You need to know how to live your life. You need to have something, and to know how to live your life, and to be happy, not to just live your life in a certain kind of way, but to do it with joy and to do it with feeling. It needs to be something that you learn. It becomes part of your learning.
And therapy.
So that's why in text number 7 it says, without the oral tradition, which explains the written law, we wouldn't know how to practically perform a single mitzvah. In that sense, the oral tradition is more about the recipient of the Torah, means the person. Moreover, the oral tradition is transmitted by word of human mouth. In that sense, it relates more to the physical person. And Torah Shebal Peh relates more to God. While Torah Shebiksav, the written law, relates more to what God mission to the world, while Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, is really more about my participation in Torah. That's why the whole Gemara is about arguing. There's no arguing in the Torah. God says this and God said that. Take it or leave it.
I'm just going to say take it or leave it.
Live or die. Right? Nasat Elchem is a chayim, it's a mavis. I'm giving you life and death. Take it or leave it.
But you can make it so colorful.
But Torah Shebal Peh is all about arguments. They argued and they argued. Sometimes they come to conclusions. Sometimes they never come to it. They don't come to a conclusion. And the argument continues. Because it's about the argument. It's about the journey. It's more about the journey. It's more about the development of life than per se what you're going to do or you're not going to do. It's why you're doing it. It's the more about why you're doing it that can be more important than what you're doing. Because the why will change what you're doing.
That's why everybody has a different.
Yeah. And that's why everybody does something for a different reason. We do the what, not always with the same why. Those learn Chassidus, those learn Nigla, Chassidus, those learn Musar. Everybody's doing it for a different reason. It doesn't make a difference. Ultimately, we're doing it.
Right.
But it's going to change the attitude between the why. Why is somebody doing it? And it's going to change the emotions. It's going to change the excitement or the lack of excitement. And that's concerning the person. So, for example, a simple example, when a poor man comes to me and wants $1, to him, as I give him $1, I don't care if I'm happy, sad, give me the $1. I want $1. I don't care if you're happy to give the $1, you're not happy to give the $1, you're in a good mood, you're in a bad mood, you're gonna feel good about it, what do I care? Give me the $1. But self-understood, if my attitude is about me. So if I'm gonna give $1 with simcha, and I'm going to be satisfied, and I'm going to be happy doing it, and I'm going to understand why I'm gaining, why should I do it, and it's going to ultimately change who I am, and that's also important. It's not only the importance the poor man gives $1, it's also important to what the poor man affects me. So that's why the Gemara says every rich man has to feel that he's a poor man, meaning that not only that he gives, but he receives something. When the rich man thinks he's only giving and not receiving anything, then he's missing something. The rich man has to feel that not only is he giving the $1, but he's receiving something. He's receiving. He's the ani. He's also the poor man in the story. He might be receiving $1. But I'm receiving something maybe worth more than $1. Right? I might be receiving a mitzvah. I might be receiving I might be receiving great feelings, great emotions worth more than $1. So that's Torah Shabbat Peh. We need both. The guy needs $1. That's the truth. The Eibush needs the mitzvah. Your 2 cents is not going to help him. Right? To God, he says, mix out of it. Just do the mitzvah. Just do the mitzvah. I'm not interested in your 2 cents. But then the Eibush says, I made you, so therefore I want you to get involved. Your involvement is about you. And that's Torah Shabbat Peh. And that's why we should all have a chelik in Torah Shabbat Peh. It's not like you say, the Torah Shabbat Ksav, that's God, that's correct. Torah Shabbat Peh, the rabbis. No, we're all rabbis. We're all rabbis. They might be bigger rabbis, we're smaller rabbis, we're all rabbis. And rebbitzins, whatever you want to call us. So Rava said, text number 8. Rava was wont to say, the objective of the Torah wisdom is to achieve repentance and good deeds. That one should not read the Torah and study Mishnah and become arrogant and spurn his father and his mother and his teacher and one who is greater than him in wisdom, or the number of students who study before him. As I stated, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. A good understanding have all fulfilled them the mitzvahs. That's a powerful, that's the Gemara's statement. That's it. The Torah wanted to make a person a better person. Right? Torah wanted. God had a mission in the world, self-understood, to change the world, but it will ultimately change the person. He's not going to change the person by doing mitzvahs. What's going to change the person is what's in his mind. Is ladas, the knowledge that he has of the mitzvah, the comprehension he has.
Doesn't the mitzvah also elevate you spiritually?
That's true too.
So it does change a person.
But it's in your mind that you're that spiritual. I can do a mitzvah, I feel no spirituality. So it's in your mind. The more you know about spirituality, the more you know about God, the more you can have that relationship, spiritual relationship. Or else it can be a total fantasy. Everybody can have their own spirituality. They made up their own spirituality. What is spirituality? What is spirituality? Everybody has their own Baba Maisa.
That's right.
Everybody has their own Baba Maisa. We have thousands of spiritualities out there. What is spirituality? Spirituality is God. Based on the Torah is God.
Right.
So you have to know God. So spirituality is not a good feeling. It's not about a good feeling. Most people think spirituality is a good feeling. Drugs is a spirituality too. Get me high. Right? Drugs.
Marijuana. Yeah.
Whatever.
But God
We have a
forbid.
lot of things that gives us a good feeling. Gives us a good feeling. What is true good feeling? What is true spirituality? That's God. Then you have to learn Torah.
That's the natural.
Then you have to learn, you have to understand the Torah. To really have, in the Torah value of spirituality, is to learn Torah. Is to learn godliness. With your brains.
That which brings you closer to God.
And everybody's going to be different. So that's what we say. Say, God should give me a place. I should be able to learn the place. Okay, let's go. We went over the time. As usual. I want to come to we have to get to the end of the Sikha. We have to get to the end of this. Okay. So, let's get this over. Ready?
It's a long chapter.
So let's go back to the Baisusin. The Sadducees.
Okay.
So we're going back to the Sadducees. So the Rebbe comes back. Comes back to so understanding this. The Rebbe comes back to the Sadducees and why they made their mistake. What was their mistake? So the Sadducees always wanted to have that Shavuos should be near Shabbos, day after Shabbos. Why? Why did the Sadducees? Why was it so important for them that Shavuos should be next to Shabbos? It doesn't say that. It said the 15th day. Why was it so important for the Sadducees that Shavuos should be near Shabbos? Because the Sadducees, Shabbos was a very important day by the Jews. It was a very important day. What was the importance of their Shabbos by the Sadducees? Different.
Because it was the first day of creation.
No. What was so important with Sadducees by the Baisusim is to cut yourself off from the world. The Abishah said, have nothing to do with the world. That by the Sadducees, Shabbos was a total cut off from the world. If you think about it, you might say they were more holier, right? Cut off from the world. Nothing, right? Go back to living in caves. Go back to living like in a cave. That was by the Sadducees. You wanted to be holy? Go back to the caves.
Okay.
Oh, but you have a clock there that can put the furnace on. Close it. Go back to the original. Go back to the 6 days of creation. Go back to living in the cave. Okay? That's what the Sadducees. So they said, you know what? That's the beauty of Shabbos. The beauty of Shabbos is become like a caveman. Separate yourself from the world. Become like living off nothing because you can't touch nothing. You can't eat anything. You're basically living in the past.
You can't eat?
No, you can't open the refrigerator. Yeah. You can eat everything cold. Eat cold food. Have no lights, no heat, no nothing. You're simply going back to you're going back to the original, like he said, in creation. Going back to the original creation. Which might say, wow, maybe that's true. That's a way to become holy. So, right? That's what the Torah says. No work, no fire, no nothing. Basically, sit and do nothing.
Learn Torah.
Right? Doesn't say learn Torah. It doesn't say that in the Torah. That it says be holy.
Rest on.
That's it. Sit and sleep a whole day. Don't eat too much. Whatever. So the Sadducees, that's the way they looked on the concept of holiness. They looked, the more you go away from the physical, the holier you are. So that's why the Sadducees wanted to have Shavuos. The giving of the Torah should be near Shabbos. Shabbos is the concept of holiness, and that's the giving of the Torah. God gave the Torah, the law, that what? This is what you got to do. I don't care that it doesn't fit in you. I don't care what you think. Right? What you think is the opposite of the Torah, according to them. Your thought is not the Torah, so therefore, always put the Shabbos near the Torah. Near the giving of the Torah. Just like Shabbos means cut yourself off from the world, the Torah tells you cut yourself off from the world. Let's follow what the Torah says. Who cares your thought? Who cares your interpretation? Who cares doesn't make a difference. The Torah says. End of story. So that's why the Sadducees wanted the Torah and Atzeres should go together. Shabbos and Atzeres should go together. Look at what it says there. So on Shabbos, there's no labor. It is a day devoted to enjoying divine revelation. On Shabbos, godliness is revealed in the soul. During the week, however, godliness is not openly revealed in the soul. Rather, it yearns deep down in the heart for that revelation. But on Shabbos, it's actually revealed. So therefore, the Rebbe writes in text number 10, this was the Sadducees' argument. In so much as the holiday of Shavuos is about the divine revelation of above, in order to proceed by Shabbos, which also is not about a person's divine service of changing the world, but about a heavenly revelation of holiness. And therefore, it's a day of rest without labor. So he said, Shabbos and the holiday should go together. Right? But but Moshe Rabbeinu said no. Right? The Chacham said no. The Chacham said no. Shavuos does not have to follow Shabbos. Shavuos does not have to follow Shabbos. Shavuos can fall out of the middle of the week too. Right. It's a 50th day from Pesach. Why? Because Torah Shebal Peh. Because the Eibishter gave the Torah from heaven. You're 100% right. But he also Moshe Rabbeinu gave Torah Shebal Peh. Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jewish people the oral law that they will be able to interpret the Torah and to bring out halacha according to the way they're going to live their lives in this world.
Yeah.
So if Shavuos falls out on Monday, or Tuesday, or Wednesday, or Thursday, it shows you actually the Matan Torah is more the whole concept of Torah is not that it falls out on a spiritual, it's not only a concept of revelation from heaven, but actually a revelation of a human being. So now you understand. Let's end this off. So now you understand. Ready? Let's end this off. Ready? Vayidei Zeh. Text number 11, page 49. As our ancestors were traveling in the desert, they laid the groundwork for the descendants to subdue the material body and get to join the divine soul's love for God. That means that the Jewish people were 40 years in the desert was the greatest blessing for them. You know what it means to incorporate divine revelation of Mount Sinai and to become part of the Jewish nation? That took 40 years.
Right.
That it took 40 years is a miracle.
But you weren't there.
The only way it took 40 years is because they didn't work. That's all they did was learn Torah. That's all they did was to sit and study and learn Torah 24/7.
Amazing.
Understand? If that's why the Gemara says that the Torah was given to those that ate the man. They didn't even have to go work for their food. They received man from heaven. They needed to be able to take 40 years for them to incorporate all this knowledge into a reality so that the next generation would know what to do.
Your physical reality. Yeah.
Right. The next generation and the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. If they wouldn't have had that, if they would have gone from Mount Sinai into the land of Israel, right away to work and fight a war, you would not have anything.
They wouldn't know what to do.
They wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't have a chance to even sit down and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
They would never have an understanding of what the heck is going on. Yeah, you would have a couple of elite guys, or the rabbis, or those who sat and learned. You know, you'll always have that group that will know because they're not working. Or the tribe of Levi that didn't. You'll have that group. You always have the elite group. But as a nation, of men, women, and children to be able to have a grasp of what this whole thing and this whole teaching is and how it affects the day-to-day life, that needed to take 40 years for the Jewish people to actually know exactly what was needed from them. So when it went into Eretz Yisrael, they would know exactly what to do, and not only that, they would be able to give it to their children and to give it until today. So that was Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Rabbi Yochanan's answer was an epitome. You think if Moshe Rabbeinu loved Moshe, you're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu's love. Moshe, you don't know Moshe Rabbeinu's love.
That's true.
The love of Moshe Rabbeinu was that he could have taken them for 11 days, but he took them 40 years. The love of Moshe Rabbeinu for the Jewish nation was so deep that he could have taken them in 11 days. You're saying Moshe Rabbeinu's love was that he gave them another day, another weekend, a long weekend. Moshe Rabbeinu's love was that he could have given them 11 days and he took them 40 years. So they would be a nation that would understand the Torah, would comprehend the Torah, would become Seichel Kain B'Seir Secha. They would be able to argue in the Torah. Like this, the Jewish people would never be able to argue in the Torah. You wouldn't have this whole library. To argue, we're good at. I'm talking about to argue in the Torah. Arguing is not a problem. To argue in the Torah, that's the 40 years in the desert.
Rabbi,
That's the beauty of this thing.
maybe that's why Mashiach is taking so long. Because Hashem is giving us time to do tshuva.
100%. 100%.
We're so slow, we don't get it.
Correct. This is do you understand? So this is actually a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful thing. Let's finish this off because it's very late. Ready? And it laid the groundwork for our descendants to do the material world body and get it to join the divine soul's love of God. Our work is only possible because the source of these klippas have already been subdued by our ancestors in the desert. Otherwise, it would be totally impossible for a person to overcome his body and his animal soul, the Alter Rebbe says. So because of the avoid of the Yidden, we have to thank the Jews in the desert who died in the desert for all their service, that they worked for 40 years, they learned this Torah, they incorporated it, they worked hard on it, and they gave us what that's Torah Shabbat Peh. What is Torah Shabbat Peh? Torah Shabbat Peh is the 40 years in the desert. What Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote down 1,000 years later was the 40 year of learning in the desert. So that 40 years of learning that generation learned, and they gave it to their children, and their children to their children, and their children to their children, was ultimately written by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. But where was that old? Where did the whole body came from? It came from the Jews 40 years in the desert.
And if they had a problem, they had Moshe.
They had Moshe and Aaron and everything. So 40 years in the desert gave you a Torah Shabbat Peh. You understand? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying. I could have done 11 days. You wouldn't have Torah Shabbat Peh. I could have done it in 11 days. I loved you. I wanted that this should be 40 years. Now you have a Torah Shabbat Peh. You have a wealth. You have a wealth of knowledge that's going to keep you going forever because of these 40 years in the desert.
And here we are.
Now you look at 40 years in the desert, totally different.
Yeah.
Before you think it was a punishment, now you understand that it was a bracha.
It was a bracha. Because nothing back comes from heaven. The Eibush Hashgacha Prat is everything's divine providence. So God wants to bring them in 3 days. Because that's what God wants. God loves Jews. He wants to bring them in 3 days. But then you don't have Torah Shabbat Peh. If you bring him in 3 days, you don't have that wealth. That's why the Eibush says, ultimately, he's not angry that the Jewish people were 40 years. Because we are here today because of those 40 years. Let's just end this off. Text number 13. We'll end it off. We'll skip one text. This is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was telling this Baisi. According to your view, it would have made more sense for there to have been an intense divine revelation of above, so that to bring them quickly into the land. See, that was the argument. The Baisi said, "Look, I think that Shabbos and things should go together. Everything should be from above. And Moshe Rabbeinu should have brought the Jews and God should have brought the Jews into the desert, into Israel in 3 days. Why? Because everything, who cares about human interaction? It's about God's love. More spiritual life, so that people enjoy themselves. The fact that he delayed them in the desert for 40 years proves that Moshe's true love. It's not what they wanted, it's what they needed.
Yeah.
It's what they needed. Sure, they would want to get into Eretz in 3 days. But that's not what wouldn't be a good situation. They needed to be, Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm going to show you true Ava. Rabbi Yechon Mizaki said. You think that that's Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu's true love is that he took the Jews to the desert for 40 years. He brought them to the work of their own. He taught them how to be Yidden on their own. They wouldn't have they wouldn't have to have a God to be there. If it would have been in 3 days, they would have to have Moshe Rabbeinu and God to be there with them every single moment of the time, because they have no idea what's going on.
Right.
Made sure that they were there for 40 years. And they learned how to be Yidden. Actually, you learn Rashi today. Rashi says for 38 years, God didn't even have so much of a relationship with them. Right? It was Vayomer, not Vayidaber. It was more of a separation, seemingly. Because the Eibishter wanted to have human, let's see if you know how to live like a Yid. Now you know how to live like a Yid. Now we're ready to go into that. So that took 40 years. And that's the beauty of this Gemara. That's the beautiful teaching of this pasuk. I could have taken you 11 days, but I took you 40 years. Thank me. Not only you should thank me, but all Jews throughout history thank me that I dragged the Jews to the desert for 40 years. What a beautiful way to look at something. What a beautiful way. That's the